Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is Monday, June 20th, and I've got to apologize to everybody. It's been a couple weeks since we've done a show, and that's totally my fault because I've been traveling and doing some stuff. I went to Mexico, and I stayed in a place that was awesome, but it had no Wi-Fi, and so I couldn't really do anything.
Which is probably good. You know what I mean? Like when you get away, I'm the worst in the world at like not unplugging from stuff and just enjoying my time away. So I think it's probably a good thing that you got the chance to do it.
It was good, but like it wasn't expected. It's a buddy has a place down there, and he had Wi-Fi, but when we got there, it wasn't working. And the entire time we were there, he tried to get it working. And in between drinking, of course. So the drinking took priority most of the time. And so, there we were without any Wi-Fi. So sorry about that, guys. We've been gone for a while. We're going to get into more of a natural rhythm here. At least I can get into a natural rhythm, not knowing if Evan, if you're going to be around, but I should be around.
That's good.
That's good.
I mean,
it's good if you're having a podcast.
Yes. I think having regular content out there, content's kind of a dirty word for some people, but just regularly being able to catch up because there's so much that goes on. Although, honestly, if we were going to miss a couple of weeks though, we had a pretty darn good stretch there to miss. You know what I mean? Because up until those two wins against the Braves, there was not a whole lot. And I mean, and it's funny because I go back to Sean's preview of the Cubs Braves series. It was out there. He was like, exactly what everybody else thought. He was like, this should be a blowout for the Braves. But hey, who knows? It's baseball. Anything can happen. And then sure enough, the Cubs managed to rip off a pair of wins against a Braves team that came in really hot and by all accounts should have wiped the floor with them. But,
Quite unexpected, actually. But again, like very typical of what we've seen from the Cubs since they've stopped being good is, right when you expect them to be at their worst, they actually show up for a game or two. And then they revert back. There's no doubt. Of course, they are going to be playing the Pittsburgh Pirates, which we'll preview here soon. I'm not sure that's going to be much of a preview, but we'll give it our best shot. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, this is one of them where you finally get, we're at the point in the season where teams know who they are and what they are. And, this is kind of one of them where it's like, if you've ever played the checkers, my great grandma used to play the checkers version called Giveaway, where you actually tried to lose. You tried to be the first person to get rid of all your pieces.
I've never played that one. Nice.
And this feels like a series of Giveaway where both of them are like, no, you go ahead and take that extra run. Don't worry about this, because I know a lot of people joke, and it's a little bit funny, right? The Major League Baseball draft is not nearly the same as the NBA or NFL, right? For a number of different reasons, and while those can certainly have their fair share of busts and so forth, you're generally, if you're picking number one or, top five, even beyond, you are expecting to, at the very least, have someone who's going to come in immediately and impact your team to be, whether that's as a starter or whatever, like immediately. Even some of these guys who aren't that good, but then you look at the Braves starter, and Ian Anderson actually did pretty well, but Ian Anderson was the number 3 overall pick in 2016. I mean, he made it up within 4 years, but he's been okay. He's like a number 5 starter, but that's the number 3 pick. And it took 4, can you imagine in the NBA and, having to wait 4 years for a dude to come up and then be like a rotational player on the backside.
Well, it wouldn't happen because in the NBA, there's no development.
Yeah.
Right. There's no developmental
league.
Done.
Like, they're like, nope, sorry. You can't. So I guess where I'm driving at it there is like, the Cubs can suck really bad, but now that there's a draft lottery,
they do suck really bad.
Yeah, they do. But I mean, they can keep sucking and get into, let's say, a top. But even that, you don't finish just because you finish with a bottom 3 record. That just means you have a higher percentage at winning that draft lottery, right? And now,
yeah,
if whatever reason it's top 6 picks, well, what if they finish with a 4th or 5th worst record, and other teams get those lottery picks ahead of them, and they end up 7th, right? Again, is that a big difference? Not really, but the way the CBA does it, you can only get, if you're a team that pays into the revenue sharing, you can only get a lottery pick, 1 year in a row. You have to be out of it that next year. So if they manage, it would be the worst possible scenario. I guess where I'm going at is if they don't get a lottery pick this year and they've traded these guys off, I think that disincentivizes them next year from really trying to turn it around. Now, if they get into that lottery, they can't do so again the following year. And I think getting into it would actually signal that they're going to have to try to be, although there again, it's not the same as all those other sports. So it's not as if you can go like, oh yeah, crap, we're picking 8th instead of 3rd. Oh, geez, it's horrible.
Does the lottery start in the 2023 draft?
Yes. Yeah, because the Cubs picked 7th in this one.
Yeah.
They've got the 7th pick, which I think is actually a really, really good spot for them. It looks like they're going to be able to come away with a couple different guys, a very good hitter, one way or the other, whether it's one of the top high school hitters. There's word about them being connected to one of the top college hitters. Right.
And that's almost what you have to do these days. I mean, as you were talking, like, and I'd love to see an analysis, like a complete breakdown over the years. And I'm sure there's one out there that shows like how successful top 10 pitchers have been versus top 10 batters. And I'm willing to bet that the top 10 pitchers, as you had mentioned with Ian Anderson, just it's hard. It's tough knowing who's going to have arm issues, who's not going to have arm issues, whose stuff is going to play when you get to the big leagues and against more advanced hitters versus hitters, right? I mean, they're easier. I think they're easier to scout.
Yeah. Well, and the injury risk is so much less, right? They were, I forget who was, for the life of me now, I can't remember where I saw it, but they took the prep pitcher, especially prep pitchers, right? If you're looking at a college pitcher, it's a little bit different, but high school pitchers, there's a reason those guys don't typically go all that high. And they were looking at like over the last, I forget however many years or not the last hour, because the last few, right, you don't really matter. Anything after 2018, those pitchers are not up in the big league, so it doesn't matter. But they looked at it, and I think it was like the prep pitcher who got the highest bonus that year, and then did they go on to be the most successful or whatever it was. And I think the only one was like Lucas Giolito and Max Fried, I think, were the ones in their class that had, that are close. But by and large, most of those guys, if you're drafting a high school pitcher, and you're doing that for, which is the what's his name? Lesko? Is that
Dylan
right?
Lesko.
Yeah. Who, again, and had to have TJ surgery. So now you're really, but that guy's still going to go in the first round somewhere. So it'll be very, very interesting kind of to see what they come away with. I think it's going to be a hitter, because at some point they're going to have to trade some of these prospects, right? They're going to have to, because they can't all come up. We can be really excited about all these guys. And Hoyer talked about that today too, about when you eventually talk about, building up their war chest or whatever, or having prospect currency, because, and I don't even mean that they won't all make it because some of them will wash out. I mean, you physically, literally do not have room for every top prospect to come up. Eventually those guys are going to have to be moved because 5 of them are redundant or whatever, right? So yeah, and so I think some of these draft picks will be used to backfill, and I don't think they want to draft a pitcher. I think they want to go with a hitter because, again, easier to project.
Yeah,
they can fill those guys in, and a lot of their hitters are moving quickly through the system, young guys. So I think that's easier.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting. The draft is about 3 weeks away. I forget what's the date exactly.
It's was it July 20th?
Oh, that'd be a month then, huh?
I might just be making that up, but
yeah, I don't know what the exact date is, but it's
later than usually than it usually is, I think. But well, everything kind of got moved back.
17th. Is it All-Star weekend?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, because they wanted to tie all that stuff together, right? Isn't that how they're finally? Major League Baseball's kind of doing some smarter things with that.
Took a while.
And this year's a little bit weird, right? Because everything got delayed because of the lockout and all that. So, but
yeah, that'd be the 18th, Monday the 18th,
okay.
the day
That's
before the All-Star game, I think, is the date of the draft. Although you think
the
they'd
first
have
round,
that
right?
on the Cubs schedule. So it's like I'm looking at the schedule on Cubs.com and it doesn't say the date of the draft. You think that'd be something they'd put on their schedule, but they didn't. I don't know. They'll figure that out soon.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go and kind of how all this plays out. As for the Cubs, you mentioned 2-9 since our last show, which unfortunately was 2 weeks ago. We will start doing more frequent shows. 2-9, and thank God they just took 2 of 3 from the Braves because it was looking real bad. Their pitching is just terrible. I mean, and this has kind of been, the story of the past many years, really, even when they were doing well, and they've had some decent pitching from, like Kyle Hendricks and when John Lester was pitching well, back in the Jake Arrieta days, it seems so long ago now. But really, it's been that development of the pitching that's really lagged, and we're starting to see some younger guys like Keegan Thompson, Justin Steele's look great. Excited about Caleb Killian, who goes tonight, I believe.
Yep.
And so there is some kind of upside there, but the pitching's been really bad. Kyle Hendricks is a train wreck. He's one of the worst pitchers in the National League, if not the worst stat-wise. And let's keep in mind, he's had a couple really dominant games.
Yeah.
And so without those, it just goes to show you how bad he's been when he's bad. And so it's like, man, I tell you, I don't know what to do about Kyle Hendricks before we get into all the other stats, but it's just like you say, all right, are you going to trade Kyle Hendricks? Well, I don't know. Can you trade Kyle Hendricks?
Can you? I was just thinking this before you even got to Hendricks. I was thinking, have we reached the point where we actually it's kind of flipped, like just as we got to the point where I think people wouldn't be happy about it necessarily. They just wouldn't be that upset to see him move just because he hasn't been very good. So you're like, yeah, we wouldn't be upset to see Hendricks traded. And then it's like, oh God, they're not going to be able to trade him, and they're going to have to keep him. And
that's a worst case scenario, I think.
Yeah. Although I sort of feel like that's one of those where you look at it and say, well, is it, and this is not to cast aspersions right on his mental toughness or whatever, but could another team look at that and say it's the situation that he's in? The team sucks. There's all this other stuff. A change of scenery will do him well. I have to think somebody looks at his track record and gives a shot at that just because of what he's been, who he's been. And if you have a team that's already got some really good starting pitching, if it's a contender looking to fill out that rotation, whether a guy got hurt or whether they just need that fourth or fifth starter, I could see that making some sense. But at this point, it is, I mean, I hate to say this, but we're deep enough. And let's be honest, too, it's been a couple years. Last year was really bad, right? He led the league in home runs allowed. He's given up bombs way too regularly, and he's walking a lot more batters now too. So those bombs hurt more. And man, I don't want to say Hendricks has taken up. I don't want to go like as far as the Hayward thing and say he's taken up a spot from a younger pitcher who could be using it. But you mentioned two guys who started for him on Friday and Saturday and got wins, and then Hendricks is the one who wore the loss.
Yeah,
and the Cubs were out of it early in that one. So it sucks. I'm not happy about saying stuff like that. I'm not trying to run him out of town or anything, but it's just
when he's looked bad the last couple of years, he's looked like like a guy who you wouldn't even want on your team at all. But then he's
pitching against the Braves. He's awful. Like the Braves have his number in a bad way too. But anyway.
But yeah, he's had those games where he just dominates, like utterly dominates. And so you're right. I mean, like to a team that needs like a maybe a borderline 3, more like a 4 guy. But it's hard to imagine that there are many kind of teams playoff, kind of on that line of whether they're going to be in or out, or, even dominant playoff teams that need to pick up a 3-4 pitcher, unless there's some injuries happening. So it's like, it feels like it's all going to have to roll the right way if the Cubs are going to trade Kyle Hendricks, and maybe he's an add-on, which is a crazy thing to think about, but he could just be an add-on.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's like, who am I thinking? Trevor Williams last year, right? Threw him in with Javier Baez to get Pete Crow Armstrong. I mean, maybe that's a situation where they're like, well, we can do this. So, well, how about if we throw in Hendricks? Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can go here. Now, I mean, he's on a very reasonable contract, right? He's still got a little bit of control, but it's and this is really, really dumb to say, in terms of like, I shouldn't have to say it, but he's one of the very few long-term commitments between him and Bodie and Hayward. And now, I mean, you've got Suzuki and potentially Stroman, but that does remove some of the money from the budget, which if they aren't going to go for it next year, right there, I mean, Hoyer talked about, he said the money will be there when it's time to get aggressive again. And if that's not next year, then that might just be a way for them to save a few million more dollars, or to not spend a few million, however you want to look at it, right? Which I hate. I don't agree with that. I'm just saying that it's potentially a way to clear off, unless they said, we're really going to go for it, and we are going to go sign other pitchers, and hey, there's a few million extra dollars that they can use to go do it. But
yeah,
it's weird that I'm even thinking that way regarding Kyle Hendricks. But
yeah, I mean, just looking at June, the Cubs offense has been kind of middle of the road. It hasn't really been terrible. Top two guys, Ian Happ, he's batting .371 with a 181 WRC plus, 0.9 FWAR, free agent in 2024. Wilson Contreras, batting the second overall offensive player for the Cubs, batting .311 with a 170 WRC plus. Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ right now are both having career seasons. And we know Contreras is a free agent next year. We know Happ will be a free agent after 2024. I think we were, I don't want to say surprised, but I'm not really sure what word to use. But when Wilson Contreras wasn't traded last year, when the Cubs dumped everybody, it kind of felt like, well, why didn't they trade Wilson Contreras? Well, they're going to look like geniuses now, because Wilson Contreras, as I mentioned, is having a career year offensively. And he has never been more valuable than he is right now. And so, I mean, maybe that was the thing. They felt like Contreras wasn't having a great season last year, and that it made more sense just to take the risk on holding him because he could. With Ian Happ, I don't know if that's the same. And I don't want to, I do want to suggest that Ian Happ might get traded, but I don't want to suggest that I want him to get traded. But I mean, listen, again, he's having a career season so far this year. He's showing power from the right side. And we've seen Ian Happ be really streaky, and so meaning he could go on a couple month streak where he's not great. And he's been really good lately. And so, see, if they trade Wilson Contreras, I don't see why they wouldn't trade Ian Happ, although I don't think Ian Happ is nearly as valuable, obviously, an outfielder. But what do you think about the possibility of them getting rid of Ian Happ, and what would the circumstances be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, although, back to what I said, if they trade both of those guys, and this is kind of, I had not included Happ in that group previously, but I had, I've written about it. I think I talked about it on here, maybe, that if they move on from Contreras and or one of, say, Stroman or Hendricks, you throw Happ in there, any two of that group, to me, says we're not trying next year either, right? Because you would have to then replace. Look how they're this bad, right?
Yeah,
with two of their top four hitters, and I'm talking about just in the order, having career seasons, right? Good, and these are historically, they have been good hitters. They've always been above average offensive producers. Even like everybody loves to hate on Happ, but he's always been an above average offensive producer. If you move both of those guys, neither of whom is even making much money, right? In the grand scheme of things, they're payroll to production or production to payroll ratio is, I mean, think about that compared to Jason Hayward, right? Imagine that. They keep Jason Hayward and they get rid of those two. If they move on from both of those players, I don't even think it would be possible for them to turn around and compete next year, even if they wanted to, because they'd just be replacing too much. Now, should they extend both of them? Yes. I don't want to say I'd be shocked if they didn't extend, but if they trade Contreras, if they keep Happ this year, they almost have to extend him because now he's the only thing that's left. As far as your team, who's still got some potential to be really good in the future. I mean, I think he'll continue to age well, but I just that would be kind of baffling to me because then look at everything you're going to have to replace. I mean, a corner outfielder, switch hitter who can, kind of play all over, give you some good athleticism, and then the best offensive catcher in baseball, who, again, part of the reason he's been so good, Contreras said, is because he's been DHing so much.
Yeah.
And I still, part of me still in the back of my mind says there's something to that if they are, and I don't think they have, and I'm not saying I believe they'll extend him, but that almost feels like a way to sort of bring his value down in terms of internally, in terms of contract talk, because you're saying, well, a catcher is worth X, but you're only catching half the time. So we should pay you like a DH, right? And DHs aren't going to make as much as catchers. And Contreras really should continue to DH a lot because I think that's a huge contribution to why he's been as good as he is. But trading both of them, I don't know. I don't know how they come back from that. That's because look at what they're doing this year. Look how bad it is. Look how much I'm getting texts and emails from the Cubs like every day about them trying to sell tickets. Right, and I get that that's kind of a thing.
If you go on their website right now, if you go to Cubs.com, the first thing that pops up is join the season ticket waiting list.
Yeah.
People, there is no waiting list.
It ain't a waiting list
I got news
anymore.
for you.
You ain't waiting.
There's
for
no
anything.
waiting list.
Well, the only thing you're waiting for is, are they going to be good again?
Yeah.
they'll give you a number, but it doesn't mean anything.
It's terrible how they're trying to market that and how they're trying to basically lie to their fans to make them feel like, my God, there's a waiting list and like kind of the thing that you could always kind of, in years past, it was like a thing to be on the waiting list. And when you got called, it really was several years. And so for them to continue to try to, kind of play that as if that's the true story of what's going on right now, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. If anything, here's what's going to end up happening at the end of this year, and especially if they trade Contreras, and even more if they trade Ian Happ, is they are going to bleed season ticket holders. They are going to bleed them even massively.
More. They already are. It's going to be.
Well, I mean, they still have some. They don't have enough to sell out the place because what are they averaging? Maybe about 30-some thousand a game or something like that.
I don't even know if it's that high. Maybe it's
I'd have to look.
Well, of course, the paid attendance is very different from the actual attendance, but
that's my point. Is the paid attendance is higher because they've got the season ticket holders.
Yeah, and they did a bad enough job bleeding them out this last year. Ugh, they go another year. Woo!
And that's my point. Is that you go another year, and then it starts to look really, really bad. And so let's see. I've got 2022 average attendance here. I mean, the Cubs are. The Cubs are 6th in Major League Baseball at 32,286 a game. Now that's not actual attendance, right? That's not turnstile. That's, well, if anybody even knows what a turnstile is anymore.
Yeah.
But that's dated myself there. That's the people who've paid for tickets. And so that includes the season ticket holders. And so, I don't know. Let's look at last season where we probably had more season ticket holders, and the Cubs were averaging.
Well, last year though.
Oh, that's right.
Still had reduced capacity for a whole bunch of it. So
that's not fair. So we'd have to go back to 2019, which is the Cubs are actually good, and the average it was 38,208. Right. So you've gone from 38,000 to 32,000. So you've lost about 4,000 season ticket holders a game is the way I would look at that.
Yeah, and those aren't the cheap seats for the most part, you know. I mean, that's a lot of well, and that's guaranteed revenue. You know what I mean? Like those people got to pay that money up front.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose more of those. You're gonna lose more in-game attendance, which means you're losing more concessions. You're just losing, you know, a lot of the vibe around the place. And the other part about that is every game that goes on, every week that goes on, whatever, it becomes that much more difficult to bring those people back, right? Because yes,
because they're
once they get really good again, yeah, and once they do start spending the money, but that the problem there is like, why didn't you do this earlier, right? Why did you do this in the first place? And a lot of people are already have, and mind you, this is all going on while they're building that massive sports book on the corner of Addison and Sheffield. Like that's going up right now, which is super weird. And
what is the point of building a sports book when you can do all this online?
Right, when it's the DraftKings Sportsbook, which I assume, like, I'm sure there'll just be a bunch of TVs, like,
it's like a sports bar,
some betting windows, right? And I think the idea is that it's supposed to be like for year-round use, right? Like you could be there even if there's no games going on. But who in the hell wants to go? You and I have both been to Wrigley in the dead of winter.
It's not good
during like the Cubs convention, right? And they'll do the unconventional thing up there at G-Man. It's brutal. Why would I want to go? Because I mean, there are some people that live there, but like, are you going to make that a destination to
Locals aren't going to that
sports book?
So are they going to make it? But wait, what can they have there? So can they have like blackjack?
Can they can't have table games. I don't think. Well, I don't know what Illinois' rules are or what that had. I know they were talking about trying to build a big casino downtown in Chicago too that looked like an abomination from the I admittedly do not know all the rules there or what they'd be able to do. My understanding though is it's just a sports book. Like it's not table gaming, like not a full casino, that they can't do stuff like that. So I would guess there's going to be some betting windows and, you know, massive screens everywhere and all that. But I don't know, man. I just, and it's part of a $100 million sponsorship deal they did with DraftKings. You know, they signed that a couple years ago. I think it's like 10 years, 100 million, something like that. So I get they're making a lot of money off of that, but it's just so difficult to sit there and say, you know, how many this is costing tens of millions of dollars to build and, you know, keep that stuff going. And they're slapping it right onto the side of how they managed to maintain federal landmark status.
I know. I have no idea.
By putting a casino on it, you know, like it's so wild to me. But they're doing that, and it's like, well, the money will be there for the team when it's time to get aggressive. You've got money for a friggin' sports book. You can't pay for a pitcher. Are you serious? And you know, and I get it. And this is coming from someone who I understand there's different buckets of money and things like that. But you can move. Hey, if I got water in this bucket and this bucket's empty, guess what I could do? I could take a ladle and take money from one bucket into another one. Like you know, these are vastly, although again, the accounting I'm sure works out differently. And you know, if that money is going into the baseball side of things, that's stuff that's got to be shared with the league. So I'm sure there's some ways that they need to keep those buckets separate so that they don't have to report that as far as the revenue sharing and that sort of thing. I'm sure there are ways that all happens, but it is just, it's almost commendable how bad they are with their optics and their PR. You know what I mean? Like it's just
well,
like,
and then how much they get away with in addition to that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like just the id-gaff mentality that seems to be there of like, pay no attention to this giant 2-story, how many thousand square feet sports book that's going on there. Or yeah, come and show up for the sports book. Come here and gamble with us, folks. Our team is crap. We don't want to spend money on the team on the field. We're going to lose 100 games, but come bet money with us. It's just so weird.
It's kind of like how Trump got elected, right? Here's a guy who's obviously a buffoon. I'm assuming that even people who support Donald Trump would admit that the guy's a buffoon, but still he gets elected. And so it's kind of the same thing. It's like, here's Ricketts over here doing these things that you would think would turn everybody off, and still they're selling tickets
somehow. But it is, there are more and more people all the time that, you know, because there's only so far you can take these things, right? Because there's a lot of people, and granted, there's still plenty of people that are like, no, they had to do this. This is exactly the path. And it's like, well, first of all, that's not true. Although I did have somebody was telling me that Theo Epstein was a liar the other day. That he lied about stuff. I'm like, not being able to make good on what you thought you were going to do is different from lying.
I saw that exchange.
Right? Just kind of funny.
What was the deal with Theo being at the game the other day? Like
he was like hammered drunk and like hanging out in the basket. Like, wait, listen, I get your Theo Epstein, but if I do that, I get arrested. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that was what. But he was like hanging out with Ricketts and Hoyer for a while, and he went out to the bleachers and just like drinking beer and having his best life.
The basket. I didn't see what happened after that, but I'm assuming like what did security come down?
No, I think it was after the game.
Oh, it was
after, yeah. So I mean, dude,
but it's a liability either way, right? I mean,
he can do whatever the hell he wants. He's Theo Epstein.
That's the last thing you want. Now you got people who are seeing that, who are going to go and try and do that.
Makes no
sense.
But it was,
I don't know. I saw it. I thought it was funny, but I also thought it was a little kind of weird.
But at least they got a win. So that was, I think it's kind of funny. He was there. Ben Zobrist was there. It's like, man, all the good feels all over again. The Cubs won a game. You know what I mean? They finally.
It had been a while.
Yeah, but I think, and there again, hey, it was a beautiful weekend, right? The weather was perfect. Place looked like it was packed, which is a lot easier to do. When it's like 75 on a June weekend, like that's. But that's what they're selling, and the Cubs did win, so there was at least that. But it's like even before, I mean, they came in with a 10-game losing streak. You're still able to get a lot of people there on the Friday and Saturday games, even as bad as they've been playing. And so I think that's so much of the problem is that they are going to continue to sell the whole "it's different here," which it is. But there's a lot of people that just don't want to give them the. I mean, I'm wearing my Tennessee Smokies Elvis Night jersey. This is a game worn Max Bain jersey that I got because I went down to watch this game and watch them play over a weekend a couple weeks ago, rather than going to Chicago when they were playing the Cardinals. Right, you and I were talking about going up there, and it didn't work out. I still could have gone, but I was like, well, it's twice as far to drive down to Tennessee, but. The tickets are cheaper. The game experience, they sell these mason jar, they're plastic mason jar, like 16-ounce mugs or whatever, 20-ounce mugs, something like that. So you can buy a beer for $7, or you can buy this mason jar with a draft beer for $12, and then it's $5 refills, and you can keep bringing it back.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, we'll do that. So and at Wrigley it's like $12 for a beer, right? Like
it
period.
Is.
And so that worked out better. We stayed in a motel that was literally across the street from the parking lot. So we walked up this little hill and into the parking lot.
That didn't cost you $500 a night?
Didn't cost me $500 a night. No. Okay. And it was right there, a lot of stuff to do. So I haven't been to Wrigley in far too long, and I really want and need to get back. But I also feel kind of like, and maybe it'll probably end up being after the trade deadline, right? When I know they're just going to suck completely, and then I can at least completely get rid of all my expectations as well. But it's just really tough for me to justify the cost, knowing kind of what they're doing, and knowing that they're saying, hey, we're not trying to win, we're not being aggressive. And so then I'm like, well, why? And I think a lot of people are saying this, why would we support this? If you're telling us you're not going to be aggressive, why should I spend my money on this product right now? I can wait. And then when you're going to be aggressive, I can spend some more money too. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going before the trade deadline because I was there last year at the trade deadline with my kids who at the time were 7 and 9-year-olds. And who basically ran into the room as I was publishing, all the news about the trades, crying because their favorite players got traded away. So, I think that Ricketts doesn't necessarily take that into consideration, is that, I've got a 7 and a 9-year-old, they're boys, and they're a little scarred by that situation. And these are people who are could be fans. in the future. But now I got my son who wants to watch the Dodgers. He's still a Javier Baez fan. Javier Baez is struggling mightily this year, but I'm personally still a Javier Baez fan. I just think the guy, he's just having a rough go, but he needs some help. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but no doubt. I thought the Tigers were going to be pretty good. That shows how much I know.
You got these kids who are scarred by all this stuff that's going on, and so it's like, yeah, right now everything's great, and unless you're going to sell the team soon, you better start winning some games, or you're going to start losing more and more fans. WGN isn't around anymore, and that's what's fueling this fandom around the Chicago Cubs these days, right? Is the fact that this had been done a long time ago, and you're taking advantage of the fans that are there now, but you're losing a lot of young fans. You're going to continue to lose a lot of young fans. Luckily, my son likes Patrick Wisdom, but he's not going to be around forever. So I don't know. And if we start looking, so we hit the offense just to kind of revert back. We look at the pitching, and the Cubs pitching in June has been 28th in all of baseball. They have a 6.56 ERA. The top pitcher has been Scott Efros, who he's been great, actually. He's been completely dominant. Justin Steele is number 2. I think he's been great all year. His ERA was and is a little high. It's come down these last few games, but a lot of that has been just bad defense behind him. And he's had some ridiculously bad luck there. But I really see a future with this pitching staff, with Keegan Thompson, whether he's a starter or out of the bullpen, with Justin Steele, with Caleb Killian, with Scott Efros. Hopefully Ethan gets better, but he just hurt his arm again. And some of the younger guys, you talk about Max Bain, and so you feel like there might be enough in the system to fuel the Cubs, but it's just a matter of when. As you mentioned, if you trade Contreras and Happ, where does that kind of leave you? And you will have a tremendous amount of prospects after that, and hopefully those prospects are good. But it kind of feels like for that next step for the Cubs to be really good again, they are going to have to trade some of these prospects away, and specifically probably on some pitchers, because they don't really have any power arms still.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you see some of these guys coming up, right? You start looking around, you're like, okay, well, you look at, Brendan Davis, hopefully, and thankfully, they were able to, I think, figure out, whether he comes back this season or not, but it sounds like they were able to get everything corrected with his back issues there. And, you're supposed to have him coming up, but then you've got Triantos and Casey and Alcantara and all these other guys, Mate, and I know that Ed Howard's out the remainder of the season, but he's coming up. They have a bunch of guys, and okay, do they have Nico Horner still around? Do they go out and pursue one of those top shortstops? And that's where I think you start looking at it, and it's similar to the situation they had. It's part of the reason you get all these shortstops. Some of them can move off the position, certainly, but if we go back to the big trade that they had to acquire Chapman, right? That was made possible because they had multiple shortstops throughout the system, right? And that they were able to go ahead and make that move because they had Javier Baez, they had at the time Addison Russell, who's apparently an all-star in the Mexican League.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think he just he's like doing really well down there finally. So they were able to move on from Gleyber Torres, right? They were able to trade him away from Myrtle Beach at the time, right? He had just finished there, but so similarly, you look at like, okay, if you've got Horner and you go out and sign a shortstop, and you've got Howard and Mate, and then I know Triantos is kind of a, probably not going to, he won't be a shortstop, but he's that middle infielder type, whatever, right? So you have some of those guys that start stacking up. Now you can start looking at it saying, okay, we can move from one of these, or you say, do do you get enough value like Matt Mervis as a guy? Actually, I think Mervis could end up coming up and being a really, really solid first baseman for a while. I'm probably higher on him than most prospect lists are, just because he didn't get rated that highly, because undrafted guy, college, so he's a little bit older, right? And then you have all these young dudes come in, and they all got helium when they got into the system. Well, he falls back. Bryce Ball is hitting really well. I think he projects much more as a DH, but there are some guys that they could start packaging together that would not significantly deplete the system as a whole, but that another team might find attractive enough to start parting with some other players. So, we'll see, but that's what Hoyer was talking about. He said, you've got two types of currency. You have prospect currency and you have financial currency. Well, the Cubs have a lot of both.
They do.
But they're not spending with either. But at some point, because right now it certainly doesn't look like they're ready to spend a bunch of money, but they've got all those prospects. And then once you get a high, 2 high drafts like this year and the next summer, with all that coming in, now you can afford or to be a little bit more ready to spend from those players that you've got, because you are going to be backfilling through high draft picks as well. And I do think, we can talk about, this was asked earlier, you trust him to draft. I think Dan Kantrovitz, right, their VP of scouting, and he's awesome. I think that guy's got his head on. So I do trust them to draft well, evaluate players much better than what they have. So that's the only way. If they do trade away those players that we were talking about, the only possible way they can get back to being competitive quickly is by spending a bunch of those currencies on both fronts. They got to spend a bunch of money, and they're going to have to move several prospects to be able to bring in impact players that are going to be around for a while. So it's possible that happens, but man, I do not like the narrowness of the path that appears to be before them.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's kind of like which bucket do they start spending out of first, right? So if you're going to start spending out of the money bucket first, then you're keeping Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ on the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're adding to that, and then you're trading some of those prospects, because listen, prospects are never sure things, and then so you're going to have a lot of failure in that area still. And then when you have failure, you don't want them to fail while they're with you. You want to be able to trade them while they're still high. And so that's kind of that's what they have to think about and contemplate as they move forward, before the trade deadline on, I think it's August 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to know. We're going to know whether they think they're going to be able to start spending money, because the thing is that if they get more of those prospects, I just think the more prospects you bring in, the higher your risk is.
Yeah.
Right. And so the prospect currency is really high risk currency. Whereas, typically if you sign a free agent that's, still in his mid to upper 20s, which there aren't many of, closer to, on the better side of 30, I guess. If you sign a prospect, if you sign a free agent, then it's less of a risk, I feel, right? Unless you're signing a guy who's 32, 33 years old. And that's where you look at Contreras, who's 30. And you start to, and that's where you start to kind of wonder, all right, well, does he fit into that risk category, the lower risk category? You've just got to be able to balance the risk. And I just feel like right now the Cubs, the way they're heading with all these prospects, and if they trade away Contreras and they trade away Happ, you just increase the amount of risk that you're taking on, and you lower the chances that the Cubs are going to be good anytime in the near 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And the other more difficult part, and granted, if you're adding really good prospects to your system, right, top rated type guys, there are caps, right? You can't just stockpile hundreds and hundreds of players in your minor league system. What is it, like 180, right? So anybody new you bring in, you're automatically having to lose other players. So you could look at that and say, yes, your system is getting stronger as a result. But the problem is, this is like what we were talking about earlier, whether these guys are prep players, whether they're, maybe they're college or undrafted or international, who are late bloomers, you could run into these situations where you're making decisions on these players who are not fully formed baseball players yet, right? To where you're going to maybe have to give up on some of these guys more quickly than what you otherwise would have. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And that's why it's,
and they go on and they turn into studs.
Right. And they do so at what would still be a very low cost overall, but you've already acquired them and you're not going to have to pay them that much. You don't pay them much in the minors. You don't pay them much as rookies, right? In their first few years under control versus, trading some of those guys away and then acquiring a high priced player. And so there again is the balance, right? And some of that makes a lot of sense. But then, as you said, you can stockpile all the prospects you want. They can be rated as highly as anybody is willing to rate them. But being a highly rated prospect is not the same as being an impactful Major League Baseball player on a roster every day, right? So you can have as many as you can talk all you want about how the system is getting better. But until that pitcher that you picked up or drafted or whatever is making starts for your Major League team, it doesn't matter. Like, who cares?
Quality starts.
Yeah. And Theo Epstein had said it. Yeah, I forget exactly what, he said the strength of our minor league system is at the lower levels. And then in Chicago, where all those players are now wearing rings, and it was about because they had traded some of those prospects away to acquire players and to make the moves that they needed. But you have to spend money because let's look at the Rays. All right, Cubs need to be like the Rays. Cubs need to be like the Rays. Rays have a great farm system, great development, but they get to make a run. They're competitive. They get to make a run every few years, and then they get beat by a team that also develops well and spends money. So you have to have the fail safes on both sides. And this is where the Cubs failed so badly, right? If you have the system and you develop the players and you spend a lot of money to build in those known quantities and known commodities, then you're fine. Or if you and then on the flip side, you could start spending the money and then you fill that in with the cheaper players from your system, you're fine. Look at the Dodgers, right? Look at what the Yankees have done. That's what you have to do. But right now, the Cubs are being like the Rays, spend a little bit more money, of course, but they don't have the development pipeline yet. They got to do something to jumpstart that. So, but
that's something may come right over the next 4 days, actually, because if you look at the starting pitchers for the Cubs in this Pirates series, Killian, Swarmer, Thompson, and Steele. I mean, yeah. I'm pumped about this series because you get, 4 guys that are young guys that have a ton of upside. Maybe Swarmer a little less so, but against a team that's not great, that it should be exciting. It should be exciting to watch these guys. And I really hope that it'd be really cool if they just all 4 came out and just dominated, because I think that would give you a sense of what the future could look like. And I mean, it is what the future is going to look like, but it's just a matter of, can those guys start putting it together a little bit more consistently? I mean, I would say Steele's there pretty much. I don't know about Swarmer. I think the jury's still out there. Killian for sure, would love to see him have a good outing. And obviously Thompson is still there. I mean, as rough as Thompson's had a couple of outings, right, where he's really had not great stuff, but he's still 6-2 with a 3.27 ERA. I mean, that's on a terrible team, mind you. So that alone says a lot. Is there a situation you think where the Cubs could trade someone like Keegan Thompson?
I don't think so. I mean,
but it's hard to tell.
Well, but if they're talking about balancing present and future, right? You're talking about a guy who still has 5 years of control left.
Yeah,
chief control, right? If they did that again, that would be far dumber than trading.
I believe it's dumber.
Right, yeah, dumb and dumber. Or Happ or Contreras, any of those guys, because you're at least talking limited control and the potential that, whether it be from an athletic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, or an inflection point between those two, that you say, we just don't think they're going to age well and whatever. Whereas Thompson has kind of shown that he's still sort of learning and still has potential to get a lot better, and he's still young enough that he's in his prime. If you're trading away prime players, like for a guy who's
that much control,
right, a few years younger, well, now all of a sudden it's like, well, now what? Now you hurt the present. Not that really matters that much, but you've set back your next several years for prospects. You have a guy right now who's very good, who could be, even if you say we're going to punt on 2023, you're going to be good in 24. Well, he'll still be a main core piece of that pitching staff at that point. So, could they do it? Yeah, I just think that would be incredibly stupid. But who knows?
We've seen some crazy things happen, and it's hard to say what the future is going to look like. That's for sure. But I'm not even sure if Tom Ricketts wants to field a winner again.
Yeah, because
I know that's
got the expectations, but
what's his bottom line looking like these days? I mean, it can't be terrible. He basically owns everything in and around Wrigley. He's building this huge sports book attached to the building. I mean, like, there's got to be a number, like, right? You can run the numbers in terms of the number of people that you need to come to a game, to be in the area, to be profitable. There's definitely a number.
Didn't they say 50% full? They're at break even, basically, from operating costs. I thought that's what they said.
But that's just the Cubs, right?
Yeah.
But then you start to add in the sports book and the hotel and whatever other interests they have, the rooftops, et cetera, and if you fill Wrigley at a 50% level, what's the profitability when you take all that into consideration?
Yeah,
we'll never know.
There's still a lot of people that aren't at Wrigley that are at all those other places, and the people who are there at Wrigley are at those places before and after the game. Plus, you've got all the other people who aren't going into the game but are still around in the area and spending money. So,
but there has to come a point where at least he thinks, wow, I wonder what it would be like now that once he gets everything built out, right, to fill that up.
Yeah.
Because then you're talking about buckets and loads of money.
You would think. Wheelbarrows of cash, baby. Wheelbarrows of cash. They're finally coming.
Yeah, that's what we signed up for when we got Tom Ricketts. I think is he did get the World Series win, and it was great, and we'll always have to be able to remember that. But it's like the legacy really is kind of built off of what happens next. I think more than anything, you'll always be able to point to that, but then where are we going from here? And it's crazy because it's so unknown. The things that Jed Hoyer says, or it feels like you're hearing a politician speak when he talks. It's just kind of the same bullet points over and over again, right? I mean, he doesn't really ever expand on that. And of course, there's the strategy involved as well that they're not trying to share with the whole rest of the world, which makes it even more difficult to communicate with fans. But it's just a lot of unknowns right now. But the knowns that we do have is that we do know the Pittsburgh Pirates are going to be taking on the Chicago Cubs in Pittsburgh. And we know Caleb Killian goes tonight, and that's 6:05. All the games are 6:05 except on Thursday. It looks like there's an 11:35 start. So I'm excited about that. That should be good. And the Cubs will travel to St. Louis. So we'll try to circle back and be a little bit more consistent. We'll circle back after this Pittsburgh Pirates series. We can probably do a show on Friday as long as that works for Evan. And then they come back after 3 against St. Louis. They have an off day a week from today, and they come back to Wrigley for 6 games, including 3 against a weekend series against the Red Sox, who I don't think are doing great this season either. So it's always fun when the Red Sox come to town, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of a bigger deal. Feels a little different.
History. Anyways, that's about all we'll have for you guys today. Thanks for joining us. And like I said, we'll try to be a little bit more consistent for you. Evan, any parting words of hope?
No, I think I'm good.
We're all hoped out here. So until next week, hopefully we'll have more hope after the Pirates series, and maybe it'll be a sweep.
We'll see.
4-game sweep. We could use that about now.
Mm.
So we'll see.
See ya.
All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.